Greetings and God bless. Welcome to another episode of Pastor Mike, Dynamic Voices for a Diverse Church, powered by The Witness, a Black Christian collective. I am your host, Tyler Burns. You can follow me on X and Instagram at Burns Clan. Please follow at your own risk. And joining me, as always, is the founder of The Witness. He has a very extensive bio. He is the man, the myth, the legend, the two-time, soon-to-be three-time best-selling author, Mr. Blue Check Verified himself. He writes at jemartisby.substack.com. Dr. Jemar Tisby, what's going on, brother?
What isn't going on? A lot is going on. But yeah, I'm still here.
So the people know that we just recently had a pseudo recording retreat. I wasn't able to make it. All the explanation is in the previous episode. However, since that episode was recorded and since that recording retreat happened, we've had a massive history shifting, altering moment in our collective consciousness. And what is funny about this, Jemar, is this is a moment where we feel like everything has forever been changed. And I think it's probably because of the events before and the events after as well. This kind of leads to this huge historical moment. But I'll be honest with you, it doesn't really feel like it's a
Hmm.
historical moment. I think mainly because we've lived through so many historic, unprecedented moments that anything that the unprecedented feels precedented. I guess that's what I should say. But of course, those of you who know in Butler, Pennsylvania, recently, former President Donald Trump, he was there was an assassination attempt on his life. We're not quite sure if a bullet struck his ear. He says it does. Those close to the situation say it was glass or shrapnel, whatever it was. He's got that huge bandage over his ear. And this sent everyone, the country, into pandemonium as there was an assassination attempt pretty much in plain view of a former president, one that actually, according to video footage, a lot of other people could see. They could see him setting up, getting prepared, which is even more surreal to think of. Obviously, someone did lose their life in this particular attack, and then others were, I believe, seriously injured, critically wounded. And so I'm not sure of their current status. But Jemar, this is massive game changer. We've been talking about this off and on for the past few days. When people listen to this, perhaps even longer. And man, where were you when you found this news, and what in the world was going through your mind?
I was at my home office doing work. I guess this was on a Saturday, so I shouldn't have been, but that's how it goes most of the time. And I was like, wait a minute, what? Because it sort of was the thing of interrupting your regular programming. So I get all these notifications, social media, TV, all that stuff. And I'm like, can this be for real? And tuned in and really just couldn't believe my eyes. And it was this feeling of dread. Um, it was apparent almost immediately that Trump had survived, wasn't seriously wounded in a way that he would, be in the hospital or a coma or anything like that. So once that sort of initial data filtered out, it felt a lot like January 6th, because my first instinct once, in this instance, once we knew he was alive, was this is going to be bad. It's going to be bad. It's going to be bad for democracy. It's going to be bad for anyone who doesn't fit into the MAGA mold, basically. So I
Now,
started
explain
texting
this.
people.
Explain this. Explain why. I think it's good for us to distill this clearly.
That's good. Yeah,
So
yeah.
when we say this is bad, when we say this is going to be bad, what was specifically going through your mind?
Political violence. It will lead to more political violence is was my main concern. That in retaliation and feeling a sense of righteous justification and indignation, you would see more Trump supporters who took it upon themselves. And we've seen this, right? So, of course, January 6th was violent. It was bloody. It was destructive. But also the attempt on Nancy Pelosi's life, which got her husband seriously injured. Also, the attempted kidnapping of Gretchen Whitmer. Also, the intimidation tactics, even just at voting stations and polls. So we've already seen it. And now that their quote unquote, their man has been the target of an assassination attempt, well, as we've seen, it just takes one. And I think it's going to be bad there. The other way I think it's going to be bad is electorally. I honestly don't think this sways a lot of people, but I think what it could do is motivate some folks who were not that passionate before, some folks on the right, and maybe some independents who are still on the fence. But you know, voter turnout really matters in elections that are often won by the margins of a few tens of thousands of votes in among millions. So that's what I'm concerned about. What about you? How did you think this? I mean, what did you think? Where were you? And then what did you think was going to be the result or the impact?
So I was just getting back from a serve day that our church was doing collectively in the community, and it was a pretty awesome event, and we're able to make real significant connections with people in the community, give them hope, resources, and there was a one of our young adults, she does something called a freedom school, and there were a table of books that were set up for all the kids, and they were basically justice centered, justice minded kids books that
Mm,
she had that were basically the overflow of what she hadn't used so far in her freedom school semester. And so I looked at the stack of those books, and one of the most significant things and elements was you're not just giving people food and water, but you're also resourcing people on how to navigate what it looks like for their children to know who they are. And perhaps many of them wouldn't have the opportunity to go to a library or, be at a space where they would actually be able to go to a bookstore. But now their kids have books that they can read to them or they can read themselves. And I remember thinking, as soon as I got home and I heard the news about the assassination attempt, that it might be that moment again.
mm,
That the moment that has been talked about for years, that we seem to perpetually be running back and back through since 2012, that it might be one of those major moments again, that maybe those from 2012 to 2022, 2020, whichever one you want to say, maybe it's been preparing us. Maybe those have been dress rehearsals for this major moment that we're about to step into. It felt like it was something significant that shifted in the atmosphere, but also it was very striking for me how many of us, the online jokes, and I don't really participate in this particular case because I think sometimes I think nothing we can get into this mentality, nothing is serious, right? And so we start to slip into it. But the reality is, I think many people, the world in which we've lived in over the past 8 years or so has been so absurd that it does feel like we're watching television. I mean, it
mm,
does feel like this is staged. It does feel like it's another episode of a political drama or scandal or something of that nature. It feels like it's not real. It feels like it's almost been scripted out to be this way. So I think the corresponding conversation, especially among Black Twitter, about, oh, is this real? Is this fake? Is this stage? Especially when you find out a little bit more about the assailant in this particular case, it starts to lead to these questions of what does this actually mean and what was the motivation behind this, and it seems very convenient, and the timing seems almost perfect in correlation to a convention, all these other things that swirl through your mind, which says it feels as though we're living in this simulation of heightened democratic siege, heightened political violence. And so I thought about that and watching the responses. It's real to think this. It's understandable to think this, especially given the person at the center of it. And then I think the final thing that I thought, Jamar, was I thought back to October of 2019 when we were at the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Chicago for our first Joy and Justice conference. And so during the midst of that, people didn't know, but we were pulled into the back to be interviewed by Professor Glenn Bracey. And he interviewed us for a project that he was doing probably for about an hour, hour and a half. He asked us, what do you see as young, Black, justice minded Christians? What do you see as the next iteration of this movement? And the first thing that I said, just instinctually, I don't know if you remember this, but the first thing I said was violence.
mm. Oh
I
yeah,
said,
I
I see
remember that.
violence. I said there's no other way for me to see us continuing down this track without violence. And I don't mean that in a defeatist, fatalistic way. I don't mean that in something that we should desire. I believe that's something that we should pray against and push against as well. But what I do see is that you can only raise the temperature up so high without ever seeing these real world consequences of lives being taken. And if you watch even the lives that have been taken, all this, it still hasn't really shaken the political consciousness to say something has to change. As a matter of fact, especially those who were targeted, specifically the former president, is back to the heightened rhetoric, back to
Mhm.
the heightened political violence, because this is not just something that he does. It appears this is who he is,
Mhm.
not just a game he's playing. It's a personality he is embodying, right? So I thought of that conversation, and I thought that, oh, this is the real world's re- response. This is a real world reaction and consequence to what is violent rhetoric, which will produce violence that takes lives as well.
There's so much to what you said there. One of the things that stands out to me in terms of, this isn't what he does, it's who he is. Immediately after the bullets struck, his instinct
Yes.
was to raise a fist and to scream, fight, fight, fight. That's telling to me. um Reagan, when he was shot, hustled into
Mm-hmm.
protective custody and out of, not a gesture, not a word, not anything like that. um Pretty much any other political figure we can think of in the modern era and probably beyond, the reaction would not have been, how can I make this about me? How can I make this into
A
a
moment,
photo op?
a
you know
moment.
you
It was
know
like, how
yeah.
do I generate in this brief time where I'm wondering, like, how do I create something that parlays into something more
What's gonna look
explosive and
good?
more dynamic
Yes,
and
yes. That's the reality TV instinct, and that was a stark, shocking reminder that we elected a reality TV president who continues to be a reality TV candidate, who will also be the other thing that stuck out to me a day or two later was, because other stuff kept happening. So one thing that you said earlier is, it is a historic moment that doesn't feel historic because we've sort of been desensitized by living through all these historic moments. And you're absolutely right. We are speaking on mic less than a week after a presidential candidate assassination attempt.
yeah.
In
And it's almost
in
like
what
we've just
other
moved
era?
on. It's just business as
Yeah,
usual. Just
like I mean, even a few years ago, right? That would have been unheard of, that we would have seemingly moved on. So I still think there are ramifications, right? But it's still not necessarily the only thing that people are talking about, as it would have been maybe a decade ago or something like that. So that's pretty profound to me. Um, I also think that as we're looking at what happened, um, it wasn't a moment of unity, and that wasn't a surprise.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I don't think many, if any of us thought, oh, this is something that all Americans can agree is shocking, egregious, and no matter what your political party, we need to come together as a nation and say no to political violence. That didn't happen, not even for a second. Um, because people on the left were saying, "All right, we're glad he didn't die, but his rhetoric, he inflames these kinds of acts of political violence." On the right, they're saying, "Well, how dare you? This is a moment we should come together." And we're like, "Wait a minute, but y'all are the ones who did this, that, and the other. How is it?" And there was never, and Biden, Kamala Harris in the White House, right? They did their
Mm-hmm.
part. They did what, any reasonable
Former
politician,
President Obama.
Republican or former president, like they said the thing you're supposed to say, right? But still, there was never a sense that I got, never a moment that seemed to hit the airwaves when we'll just pause, acknowledge the tragedy of this event, and for a moment you know, put down our our sticks and our stones and just, link arms as neighbors.
Let me actually push that point a little bit further, because here's one thing I thought as I was preparing to speak on this episode today. What killing, not death due to natural disaster or surprise act or accident, but what killing, what any manner of killing or attempted killing or violence gets a united front response from Americans today? Is there anything that could get us a united front? I want us to think about this. Is there anything? So you take, for example, Gaza. That's not united. Far be it from it. A potential assassination attempt, Black Death, a hashtag. Is there any killing now today in this current climate that will get us? I mean, maybe a child or a minor, as long as they're not black,
Didn't work
right?
in Uvalde, didn't even work in Sandy Hook.
Didn't even work in Sandy Hook. So this is what I'm saying. We are at a, I want people to think about the soul of a nation. And when we think about this, oftentimes we think about the policies of a nation. We think about the moral compass of a nation. We think about the ways in which a nation treats those around it. All that is legit. Think about the soul of this nation and how, in a short period of time, let's say potentially from 2001 um, to 2024, how the calculus has shifted so much that there is no room for unity around any attempted murder, violence, killing, because January 6th wasn't even that.
Right.
Like, there are people who
Right.
just literally shrugged, and I've said it multiple times on this podcast, acted as though January 6th did not happen. Like, we literally, in the collective Christian consciousness, have expunged it from memory.
Mm-hmm.
There is very little white evangelical response theologically to January 6th, an attempted coup. Like, what are we
Yeah.
talking
What
about?
would
Where
do it?
where
Yeah.
actual Congress people not only could have been kidnapped, but mortally wounded, killed, assassinated. A gallows was put up for the vice president at the time. I mean, I just want us to think here. What is wrong with the soul of this nation? To
Yeah.
where we cannot even come to, and I'm this is less about what happened recently with this assassination attempt and more about our outlook on violence in general. We are desensitized to it. We are totally fine with it. It doesn't bother us. It doesn't upset anything. It doesn't uproot anything. And I'm trying to figure out, what does that say about our souls? And what does that
Mm-hmm.
say about the moral condition and fabric of this nation?
That's the critical question, isn't it? And how do we, or is it even possible to pull back and to come back to a moral heart, if you will, some sort of shared morality, if not even the common good, right? Because we still disagree about what that looks like, but can we have a shared sense of grief, even, right? When you ask that question, what killing would unite people? There's, I think, actually two parts to that. One is who whose death, whose loss might actually unite people, unjust, right?
Mm-hmm,
um
mm-hmm.
and then the other part, because I think there might possibly be some folks whose death could unite us in grief, as morbid as that sounds.
Oh, without a doubt,
um
without a doubt. No, no, that
um
I agree with. Absolutely.
yeah, and honestly though, that's actually, I think those people likeliest are entertainers of some sort, whether actors or sports stars, what have you. It would likely not be a politician or any
Right.
sort of public servant kind of a person.
Yeah.
So there's that part, who gets killed. The other part is who did the killing. Because in this one, we've been so conditioned to say, because of the mass shootings, because of the racist shootings, we've been so conditioned to say, okay, who was the killer and what were their motives? That was the immediate question. I mean, that's a natural reflex and reaction. You want to know who did it and why. But it was also who did it and why, so that I know where they stood.
Come
I
on,
know their
come on.
ideology. We wanted to know not just who killed who attempted to shoot the presidential candidate and why. Was he a Republican or a Democrat? Was he white? Was he black? Was he this? Was he that? Why? So that we could apportion what we think is the appropriate amount of sympathy, grief, outrage, etc. And that says something about the soul of our
Yeah.
nation.
I mentioned this a couple of years ago on Past the Mic, the book that I read by Anand Giridharadas called The Persuaders. And this whole concept that he has that there's an eroded middle ground, that no one tries to persuade anyone anymore. That we feel like our political opponents are entrenched in their views, that there's no room or space for them to change their mind or for us to try to change their minds. And he does a brilliant job of kind of distilling the humanity behind some of the most polarizing figures, specifically on the progressive side. And it was fascinating to watch because and to read, because I was actually thinking, oh, I think I know this person's story. And then you realize, oh, you don't know this person's story, right? Like I had no idea that someone like an AOC had a Christian background, a evangelical adjacent Christian background, right? You just wouldn't think that, but then you recognize, you hear the story, and you're like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't have thought that she would have gone around and tried to convince her political opponents on election day that she was still working for them, fighting for them, even though they had the opposing person's sign in their front yard or what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that were just eye opening ideologically. And it's striking to me because it really boiled down to, do you think, and this was kind of, I guess, the big conversation, do you think this person deserved to die? And rarely have we had that clear cut. Now, I'm a pastor first. Rarely have we had that clear cut of a theological conundrum, right? Which is, we were inches away from a much different climate, which I think if the bullet is an inch or so to the right, then we're probably not recording right now. We probably would have recorded that night, and the country would have come unglued very quickly.
Yeah.
We might be looking at a completely different environment. That would not have been business as usual. But the question has been asked, should the bullet have been an inch to the right?
Mm.
People are literally asking this question, and they're asking the question, does the person who threw the first punch deserve to be the recipient of the harshest consequence? Does the person who created and fomented this sort of political rhetoric over the past 8-9 years? This is a question people are asking that we have to theologically now engage and consider, because those of us as justice activists, people look at this and say it would be much easier if this person were not here. This is how people think. This would be much easier if this person were not here. Much easier if this person were not around. Much easier if this person were not around to wield power. And it leads us to a real cold, hard, and I, as a pastor, actually want to push us into this conversation. That this is a very important conversation for us to have, specifically probing our hearts to find out, what do we genuinely believe is the answer. And as you've seen this, Jemar, because you're in these spaces, I'm in these spaces where people are actually saying, oh, I wish he weren't alive. How are you navigating this? Because this is a significant moment, and that is a striking, we talk about the soul of a nation, but the soul of a people, a striking consideration.
I think it says a comment about the kind of Christianity people are adhering to, or not, as it turns out. When you have folks saying, I wish he had been killed, I get the sentiment. I get it. He's done a lot of harm and will continue to do so, and possibly even more if he gets elected. But that don't sound like Jesus to me. It
Yeah.
don't.
Yeah.
And the conversation has shifted to such a degree that if I post something like that on social media, I'll have folks on the left and progressives saying, you know, you're policing our anger, or he deserves it. How can you justify it, et cetera, et cetera? Which to me, that's a shift. Certainly there's been strains and elements all along. And but you have folks who are saying publicly they won't even pray for Trump. How'd that work? If you're a Christian, if you're a Jesus follower. So all of that to say, um, your faith is tested in a crisis, and it's revealed in a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what has been revealed to me is very disturbing because it shows an inhumanity and an insensitivity to simply human life, right? And so to me, it forces us as followers of Jesus to say, do I believe this when it's hard?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do I believe this when every instinct and every emotion and every fact I can marshal says I should wish this person the most irrevocable ill there is?
You know what I
And
thought? Oh, go ahead.
yeah,
I'm so
no,
sorry.
and will I follow the way of Jesus in the midst of that?
You know what I thought about, Jamar? I thought about this comment that people make a lot in freedom struggle. You know this. You've talked about this before on the podcast. This isn't your grandmother's civil rights movement.
Yeah.
You know what I think? Maybe it should be.
You better talk that talk.
I want to pause here because listen, I recognize and I know a couple of things are true, and I want to say this from the outset very clearly. Number one, I recognize and know that the person in question has created irrevocable harm for people's lives. Okay. We just want to make this abundantly clear. Not only made people's lives difficult, but in many cases, the cruelty has been the point, right? In order to assert power, dominance, put forward, yes. And I believe he deserves to stand um, on trial for those consequences, right? For those inconsequences. I do believe that. And he's been convicted, right? I mean, we're not talking about something too strange. Like we're talking about you should face the consequences for the actions you've been convicted of, right? Regardless of if the Supreme Court disagrees. We're also recognizing that there are a myriad of people who are on the margins, right? There are a myriad of people who are on the margins that deserve attention and energy. What often happens in times of crisis, especially, is those in power get the attention, those in power get the center. And we're always trying to put the people on the margins at the center of the conversation, those who are most affected by injustice, to put them at the center of the conversation. But I want to emphasize something here. If I truly believe in the way of Jesus, I don't have the right to dehumanize my enemy. I just don't have the right. I don't know where that shifted, changed, adjusted. I just don't know where we got on that space. This does not mean that if someone who is a white supremacist attacks my family, I do not defend my family and fight him. It doesn't mean that I'm not putting every effort into making sure that those who are enemies of justice actually end up failing and that true justice and shalom ends up winning and prevailing in the end. That doesn't mean any of that. It also doesn't mean that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. It also doesn't mean that prayer, I think sometimes we see prayer and spiritual formation and spiritual energy as a diminishing resource. That if I give some to you, I take some from someone else. When the
Mm.
reality is, God is infinite. And in God's infinite wisdom, I can pray for my enemy, my friend, my family, and those who are victims of injustice all at the same time. And that one doesn't take precedence over the other because the ultimate purpose of prayer, and this is where I think people are missing, the ultimate purpose of prayer is not to change someone's situation, But the ultimate purpose of why I go to God in prayer is to change me. So when I stand and pray, it is not just simply God move for them. It is God adjust me in the midst of the situation that I am in so that I reflect you better. So it's not a diminishing resource here. And I think we have gotten into this mentality that our political enemies or our cultural enemies or our sociological enemies are not worthy of gospel love. To which I would say, there are probably many instances in our lives where we were not worthy of love either.
Watch
But
it.
yet, the radicality of the gospel is this, that while we were messed up, while we were struggling, while we were unlovable, the love of God and the love of Christ came and got us anyway. And now here's the thing. We love a Jesus first hermeneutic because it repels the Old Testament God in our minds. A lot of us, we love that. So we like Jesus first, until Jesus says in Matthew 5, love your enemies. So then now we start negotiating with what Jesus really meant. And he says specifically, if you love those who love you, what reward is that?
Mm-hmm.
What benefit is that? And I don't mean to preach. I'm just simply saying, hey, y'all, we got to still live this thing out. And it's most
Yes.
tested in this moment where,
Yes.
and here's the test. Has my enemy, has the darkness, the toxicity, and the poison of my enemy, whether literal, cultural, relational, political, has the toxicity and darkness of my enemy infected and infested me? Have they won? Because he would like nothing more than for us to toe the line and say we oppose you to the point we're not even gonna consider good wishes to you because you weren't killed. We're not even gonna consider that. He would love nothing more because it would prove the point, and it would prove the win that he has had this much effect in shaping even his enemies, even my enemies fixate on me. And I
The
think
devil don't care how he wins.
he don't care how he wins. And what's the win? That we win a political election? Y'all, if we win in November and lose our souls, what good is it?
Ooh,
I'm
say
just
that.
I'm being real here. If you win politically, if you win culturally, if you win theologically, and you lose your soul, this is specifically, and I don't mean to get down to this tangent, but this is specifically why we left the reform space.
Wow.
Because it was all about winning theologically, and
Wow.
you would try to win an argument and you would lose your brother. I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation where I'm sitting across from people who are friends of mine and I'm saying, hey bro, are you hearing my heart?
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, yo, I'm tired of going back and forth with you politically and theologically and culturally, and I'm like, bro, we are concerned for our very lives. Does that move you to lay down your theological joust and to say, I will engage with my brother because loving him is better than loving my argument? I'm just trying to understand here. I'm just trying to understand here. It is clear what we are called to do, y'all. And listen, we justice people, you're going to see us on the front lines marching. You're going to see, hey, let me tell y'all something. I'm not going to let not one of y'all, not near one of y'all jokers, not near one of y'all keep me from reflecting Jesus. You ain't got that much power. You ain't got the, you may have power over my body, but you will never have power over my soul because it is submitted to Christ and Christ alone. And that means if I look bad and I look weak following the way of Christ, weakness it is.
We need to let that breathe, brother.
I'm sorry,
Let
man.
that
We
breathe.
we we lost, bro. We off. We off. We off. I don't understand this. I don't understand this. I don't get it. And people at my church know every month for at one point or another, what do? At one point or another, we're gonna pray for our enemies. On that Sunday afterwards, I pray for everybody involved by name. And what did I do before? What I did before was I talked to our church about what was going on. Now I talked to our church. I shared with our church what was going on. I shared with our church, hey, this is my pastoral encouragement and address to you. Took time out of the service to make sure that they got a well-orbed view of this situation as best as I possibly could. Right. But I'm your pastor, not your political analyst. And so, because I'm your pastor, I must lead you and guide you in the way of Jesus. And I got to start with me, which is no matter how I feel about this man, no matter how I feel about how harmful and toxic he's been, my call is if I consider him an enemy, I must love and pray for him. That is my job. And I'm going to tell you, this is not something that we just do just for this. It is something we consistently do every single month. We set aside time. We're going to pray for our enemies. And people are like, why are you doing this? Because you won't do it otherwise. I won't do it otherwise. I am literally tricking myself into sitting down and praying for my enemies, writing their names down, and praying that God will bless them, even though I cannot stand them. Mm. What otherwise, why are we submitted to Jesus? I don't get it. And this is not me saying that, oh, well, you shouldn't have this energy with Gaza or whatever it may be. Listen, I totally get it. We should have this energy for the marginalized and those who are oppressed. And I 1000% believe God is on the side of the oppressed. But I also believe that the gospel is big enough for oppressed and oppressor. And if it's not, then that's not a gospel. That gospel is too small. It's not a gospel I'm interested in.
This assassination attempt was, in the realest way possible, a come to Jesus moment. Or it should have been. It should have caused us to reflect. Are we at Jesus's feet in the midst of this? And if we're not, do we need to come back to Jesus in the midst of this? And I want to go back to something that you said. You said that phrase, "This isn't your grandmother's civil rights movement." And you said maybe it should be. And I agree with that. And I'll add this. This is not your grandmother's civil rights movement, and say, you're probably right. Based on how folks reacted, some folks, right? You talk about online, whatever. But even just the general tenor and tone from so many of us who call ourselves Christians, this isn't our grandmother's civil rights movement, because I didn't see enough Jesus in our reactions a lot of times. And I'll say this from a historical perspective, the fact that the civil rights movement, by which I mean the long civil rights movement, which would include resistance against slavery and Jim Crow and everything else, lynching, all of it. The Black civil rights movement was church-centric, not simply as a logistical consideration, because it was really the only institution where that could happen, but from a spiritual consideration. It formed and shaped people's morality. We should know by now that civil rights activists underwent training. And so they would go to workshops and seminars, and yes, they would train on how to march. They would train even on how to take blows without retaliating, which, by the way, is not primarily training your physical body, it's training your mental and your spiritual, because what is our natural reflex? Somebody hits me, I'm hitting you back. But in the context of a righteous protest, you are putting the oppressor's injustice on display and demonstrating your righteousness by being meek, by turning the other cheek, by appearing weak, which looks a lot like Jesus, right? The other part is, I think that one of the unintended consequences of racial progress from the civil rights movement is, and I'm speaking specifically of Black Christians here, we don't know the same kinds of persecution that our ancestors did. And thank God for that. But woe to us if we forget the spiritual resources that cultivated, that kind of situation cultivated within them, by which I mean, not to valorize or put people on a pedestal, but there was a very real sense in which regular Black folk knew the indignities they faced on a daily basis and had to have Jesus to survive, had to tap into that old time religion, as they say, because what they were facing on a day to day. I'm not even just talking about the lynchings or the cross burnings. The avert your eyes when you are passing a white person, cross to the other side of the street, go into a separate entrance. You can't get this job. You can't be part of this union. You can't marry this person. The daily indignities that we faced as a people. What do you do with that? Where do you bring that? You bring that to God. You bring that to the church, and that develops in you a sort of mentality, I think, and a sort of spiritual equipping that helps us respond. There's because then there was a lot of enemies. It was a lot of enemies. And we had to understand how to not let the evil they were doing corrupt us. And I wonder if we've lost a bit of that. And so we need to come to Jesus.
And I think this is probably the thing that I think maybe we're struggling with as people, right? Which is, this is my humanity, this is my human reaction. Amen. I think there's room for that. Some people, they've even said, "Yo, what are the imprecatory psalms for?" Right? I'm like, I think we should pray those. I think that's legitimate. Bringing justice to the oppressor, bringing those who have done wrong to justice, I think is 1000% real. It's a real version of lament. Here's the thing I want to say: does my personhood and my prayer and my spiritual formation run through Jesus? So, in other words, I can have my feelings, but the Psalms are balanced by the commands of Jesus, right? So I can't just pray the Psalms and just stop there because I'm on the other side of following Jesus. So I pray the Psalms and I say, Jesus, now what shall I do with this? Right? How will I draw this back to you and your character and the reflection of such in the earth? And I think for some of us, we haven't fully trusted that, and this is the dangerous side of things. But we say as Christians, right, the religious right and the political right, they've allowed their politics to shape their theology. We can be guilty of the same error,
Mm-hmm.
just in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that we need this so badly. We need this so, and people are going to be harmed if we don't have just policies, equitable systems. People are going to be harmed irreparably if we don't have this. If we don't have this, and I say, Amen, 1000%. If we don't have this, that is true. That is why we vote and we march and we protest and we push. But here's the problem: if we think we need it that bad, we'll justify anything to get it.
Ooh,
And
that's
at a certain point, our hope has to be built on the Savior, and we can't just say that in passing. We must believe that in our souls. And I think there is room to have the full range of emotions and frustration,
mm-hmm.
but then not stay there, but allow Jesus to inform where we go next and where we lead others to go next. And that's my commitment, which is, again, I don't have a right to dehumanize my enemies. I just don't. They're created in the image of God just like I am. And what has revolutionized me, I may not have done what they have done, but I have been a villain in someone's story. I know I have. I have been an enemy to someone else, and they've had just cause to consider me one. And so I just don't have a right. And I beg of us as we try to do this work, don't lose your soul. What think about it like this. You will lose your soul for Donald Trump.
Put it that way.
You're gonna lose your soul
What?
for 40 for
What?
45. You're gonna lose your soul for him. Nah, he ain't worth it. He ain't worth it. No, you do not have that much power over me. You do not have that much power over us. We trust Jesus more than we're upset at you.
You bring up two really, really important concepts that I think we need to grapple with. Number one, we may not win. I've been saying this more and more lately, especially as we hurtle toward the November presidential election. Um, we may not get the person elected who we think is best for this country. We may not see the law passed that we think is best, or the policy repealed that we think is best, and we cannot lose our souls in the process. As a matter of fact, we need to pay more attention to who we are, right? In these times of trial. And I think it's, as you scan the landscape of the Bible, more often than not, you see people of faith on the losing side from an earthly standpoint. And those are the skills, that's the resilience, that's the kind of character and heart that we have to cultivate, is how do we stay up? How do we have an abiding joy that does not come from earth, from earthly means, but comes from above, even in the midst of oppression? Which is not saying lie down and take it. It's not saying resign yourself or be pessimistic. It's just saying that there are no guarantees that we will get our way in this earthly kingdom. So we need to deal with that. And then I think the second thing is to add a bit of urgency. Black Christians are crucial to this generation's civil rights movement. I think that our history, our leadership is a necessity right now. Why? Well, because of our history, because we were enslaved for the color of our skin, because we were lynched for the color of our skins, because we were never included as quote unquote true Americans or full citizens because of the color of our skins. And because of all of that, we have developed a faith in and through that, a faith that transcends that, because it's a faith that relies on Jesus ultimately and not earthly circumstances. We need those resources now. But just being Black doesn't mean we have them. Just calling ourselves Christian doesn't mean we have them. We have to pray for it, work for it, cultivate it, study it, train for it, disciple it, all of those things. And if it's not the Black church, with our experience, our tradition, which is not saying that God has some special dose of the Holy Spirit for us, it's really a people under oppression.
Mm-hmm.
How do we understand the faith? If we cannot bring those resources to bear right now, then who can?
Mm.
Who will? As a body, as a people, there are individuals across the racial and ethnic spectrum who we can learn from. But as a United States historically based Christian tradition, we have immense resources that will be useful in this time. And if we are not prayed up, if we are not stayed up, if we are not at the feet of Jesus, then God will raise up someone else. And thank God that God always does. But there shouldn't be that need. There shouldn't be that necessity. So ineloquently, I'm trying to say that if we look back at things like the abolitionist movement, things like the civil rights movement, and see the faith of our ancestors before us and admire that, then we must model that today. And as we do, it will actually help, I think, lead and guide the movement right now.
That's the spirit of justice, right? That's what we need. The spirit of
That
justice.
sounds like a good book
That
title.
sounds like a good book
Wish I
title.
thought
Hey, you
it.
know, it's funny. People have said on social, don't lose your job over some tweets, right?
I
But
saw
don't
that.
use your
Yeah, yeah.
job, y'all. Don't use your job. Don't lose your job. I get it. Hey, don't lose your soul. Don't lose your soul, beloved. It ain't worth it. It ain't worth. Not for this. Not for him. Not for that. Nah. That's that's not the intention of this movement. So, hey, I want to hear what y'all think. Are we tripping? Y'all please write us a dissertation. I receive it. Leave it in our DMs. Do it.
Yeah,
We
right,
don't
Tyler, that
mind.
one, not me.
Hey, yeah. I'll take that whooping at Burns Clan. On Twitter and Instagram. Follow at your own risk, all the above. But thank you all so much for supporting. We're gonna continue to follow and track this. Please, y'all, stay hydrated. Get yourself some sun. Be with people you love. Eat really good food. Move your body. Care for your soul. Seek Jesus and stay alive. For all that I love, stay alive, please. We need you. All right, y'all. I love y'all. We'll see you soon on the next
Pass the mic.
Hey folks, Dr. Jemar Tisby here. I'm one of your co-hosts on the Pass the Mic podcast along with Tyler Burns. We've been doing this thing for 10 years now. This year's been an especially tough year if I'm honest, but we do this because of you. And the only reason we can keep doing this is also because of you. So I'm encouraging you to visit patreon.com/passthemic and become a supporter of this show. For as little as $1 an episode, you can keep us going. Visit patreon.com/passthemic.